and welcome to Shekinah Media. Today we are here with Deacon David Palmer, who is going to tell us a little bit about his own God experience. So welcome, Deacon David.
Thank you, Susanna.
So to start off with, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do right now, a small introduction to Deacon David Palmer.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm a chartered accountant. I used to be a finance director and a finance trainer. I played an awful lot of rugby for 25 years, but I'm 67 now, so I'm a bit old for that. I've been married 45 years. I've got one daughter and 4 granddaughters, which is great. And I'm a deacon in the Catholic Church and currently chaplain at Warwick University. That's me.
Thank you for that. Obviously now you're a Catholic deacon. Were you growing up as a child, were you brought up as a Catholic? Did you grow up in the faith?
Yeah, sort of. So I was baptised a Catholic, and I did confession, communion, confirmation, all about age 10, but it was a bit of a blur. And I must admit, I left the church for many years, probably about age 12. I used to go smoking in the park and tell my parents I was going to church. Terrible, really. And I went to a Jesuit-run school, but I never really got into my faith. You know, God just didn't bother me. He didn't seem very relevant.
Okay. And then in your kind of young adult years, did anything change, or were you still kind of living for the worldly things? What was your kind of mindset? What did you live for in that time?
I guess it was very much work. I trained an accountant, Price Waterhouse. So my whole life was making money, a bit of time with my family, and you know, I guess didn't spend much time even thinking about God. Certainly at university, I didn't go to Mass at all, which is awful looking back. But that's pretty much how it was. Work was the main thing in my life.
And once you met your wife, you mentioned that you were married.
Yeah.
Did anything change there? Was your wife a believer? Did she believe in God, or were you kind of together walking through life, working and then coming back?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because we got married. We met at university. We got married in church because my uncle was a priest, and you know, it seemed sensible, but my wife wasn't particularly anything. She was a nominal Anglican and she didn't mind getting married in church. So spiritually, nothing really changed at that stage. And then my daughter was born. I probably prayed for the first time properly in my life because my daughter was caesarean birth. And as a dad, there's not a lot else you can do other than pray. And we got her baptised because you do. That was the way it was. So, yeah, but we weren't really involved at that stage. I'm trying to remember now. I think we started going to church because I was taking my daughter to Catholic school, and it seemed hypocritical not to take her to church. And after a few years, my wife, June, she decided to join the church, and I didn't really know why, but she did. And we got a bit more involved. I remember I became a Eucharistic minister. The priest asked for volunteers, and I thought he meant readers, and I thought, well, I can do that. And I ended up helping him at communion. So we got sort of more involved. I remember my daughter made her first confession, and I thought, well, I better go as well. So you had these little children go in and saying, I hit my brother or I stole a sweet. And then the poor priest had me saying, well, I haven't been to church for I haven't been to confession for about 15 years. And I've probably broken all the commandments in thought, if not in word. So I was getting slowly more involved in the church. Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah.
And so when would you say that for you had that kind of personal encounter with Christ for the first time?
Right, I can date it, 26th of February 1996. What happened was somebody stood up at church one day and said, would you like to go on an Alpha course, which is a course on basic Christianity? And I remember thinking, I haven't really learnt anything about my faith for years and years. So I went along pretty much as you might go on a course like flower arranging or car mechanics or whatever. And I wasn't expecting anything, but after a couple of sessions, God became real. And he stopped becoming this remote policeman in the sky. The cross, suddenly I realised that this was the greatest sign of God's love. And then on the course, there's a day where you consider the work and the person of the Holy Spirit. And someone prayed with me. And I had a very real experience of God's love for me, and that changed my life. And the great thing was that both my wife and my daughter, who was about 16 at the time, were on the same course, and they had the same experience. In fact, there was probably about 20, 30 people in our parish who went on into all sorts of ministries as a result just of that one course where we just allowed God to touch our lives.
So at this point in your life, you've encountered God in a more personal way, not just going to church because your daughter is in a Catholic school. So how does that translate into your practical life, your family life, your work life? Did you observe any changes there? Yeah,
huge changes. My wife just gave up paid work and went to work for a Catholic charity, producing videos on Catholic teaching. And I helped with that. I got much more involved with this charity, which initially started off running alpha courses, and then we produced film material for worldwide distribution. I remember it was being used in the Falkland Islands, was one of our achievements. And because of my background, I ended up doing a lot more trustee work. So I got involved with things like Catholic Charismatic Renewal. In fact, one of the things is a sort of change in lifestyle. Before Alpha, our holidays were Barcelona and Tenerife.
Yes.
After Alpha, we started going with HCPT to Lourdes, which is a group that takes handicapped children. We go with frail elderly, and we've been doing that for something like 25 years. We take a group of frail elderly and mentally handicapped people to Lourdes. Started going to Catholic conferences, particularly the ones at Walsingham, where Our Lady appeared in 1061, going on men's weekends, and just, living our faith. So I ended up speaking at conferences on all sorts of things like management, Christian business ethics, that sort of stuff. So, yeah, very, very different. I discovered the Bible. It's really weird looking back. We had a Bible at home, but we only ever used it to answer crossword clues, which is terrible. And now the Bible is an integral part of my life, particularly when I'm preparing for preaching. It's multiple changes.
And so you talked about a couple of the changes that went on in your kind of personal life and your faith life and how you practiced your faith. What about your work life, and what about the skills that you've gained as an accountant? Were you able to translate those into to be working with the church, or?
Yes, there's a number of things. I mean, as an accountant, I'm almost a serial trustee. So trustee of Catholic Charismatic Renewal, trustee of Zion Community, which runs parish missions all over the country, trustee of Shekinah Ministries, a Carolyn group that puts on the second Saturday conventions, where we get 3,000 people once a month. And then COVID hit and we went online and got 13,000 people watching. We need to work out how do we cope with keeping both of those. 1010 Theatre that puts on plays in schools. So a number of Catholic charities, and probably the biggest one was I became a trustee of the Archdiocese of Birmingham, and served there as 6 years as the volunteer treasurer. So very much using those skills from an accountancy viewpoint. But it's interesting how God uses all of you. As one of the things that I mentioned earlier was that I know how to drink. Sounds terrible, but I can think of two specific occasions. One was in Lourdes with Claire's dad when I was drinking till about 2 a.m. Now, Claire was a girl, she was 15, she had a brain tumour, and she should have died 3 weeks before we even got to Lourdes. And there I was sitting in the bar, 2 a.m, talking to her dad. And I remember his words. He says, Dave, this is the first time that me and my wife have relaxed ever since Claire was diagnosed. And it suddenly hit me that God was using, I wouldn't call it a skill, forgive me, but using me to minister to other people in a way which you couldn't foresee. And then there was another one. I was at Twickenham after England played Australia, and with a mate of mine who's a good Catholic guy, and we were in the pub and we met this Australian couple. They'd probably be in their 30s, young man, young woman, and they were in the Australian Army, and he'd just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so we were chatting, and then my mate says, well, why don't we pray for you? And this is the middle of a pub in Twickenham. I mean, everybody'd had a few beers. And so we just prayed for them, and we prayed that their marriage would cope with this illness, and that he would be healed, and that his wife would be able to support him. Now, I know God was in that, because about 5 minutes later, I went to the bar, and this lady came up to me and she said, I heard you praying with that couple and it was really lovely. Would you pray for me? Now, I wasn't dressed like this at all. I was just normal, if I can put it like that. And so there in the middle of Twickenham, I remember praying for this complete stranger that she would cope with the difficulties in her life. And she told me a bit, just out of the blue. And you think, okay, God, you have got a big plan, haven't you?
Yes. Yes. So that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And what about maybe some other relationships in your life that you've had before, maybe in work, where people notice this change in you and they notice that you've perhaps become a bit different than before? Were there any things like that?
It's quite fun, actually, because a couple of things. I always wear a cross. And so I'd be running courses on finance, and people, what's that all about? And I had some great conversations. And I remember one guy who was a bit anti. He said, what's that all about? And I said, well, it's a maker's label. And we had a really good conversation. I've got a website which has got financialmanagementdevelopment.com, and it's got loads of stuff on finance. But it's also got stuff on evangelization, how to become a deacon, parish management. So it's a good mixture of evangelization and other stuff. And every email I send out, I've got the sort of tagline, it's 2 Thessalonians 3:13, and never tire of doing what is right. Funny, really. Once upon a time, one of my clients, this lady, asked me to marry her. You go, what? She comes up to me at a coffee break. She's relatively senior, and she says, do you do weddings? I said, how do you mean? She said, well, me and my partner, we'd like to get married, and we'd like to get married in church. And I know you're a Christian, because actually every letter I send has got stamped on it, may God bless you and keep you, as well as the emails. He said, we know you're a Christian, and we wondered if you would come and do our wedding. And I remember thinking, yay, she's noticed. And then, what do I do now? Because she lived 50 miles away. And so I remember praying, I said to her, why not find a local church and see if you like the people? Because, I wasn't a deacon at the time. It's one of the things that made me think about it. And I just prayed that she'd find a Catholic church, and it would be a welcoming Catholic church. But what struck me was that here in England, and this wasn't that long ago, 20 years ago maybe, and she said, we don't know anyone who goes to church. And that shows you the need for basic Christianity. And you can do it in all sorts of ways. As I say, just wearing a cross. Or I wear, what would Jesus do? If people ask, I say it's a management decision-making tool. There's lots of little ways you can cause people to ask you about your faith.
Yes, so living it out in your everyday actions quietly maybe sometimes, but surely and truly, that's very beautiful.